Hi everyone, hoping you all are well. Welcome back to our discussion this evening on the two princes. What we're going to be addressing is the succession battle between Jacob and Esau. And so we're going to be looking very directly at this birthright issue because there's a question about what exactly was sold or what was bartered in terms of this birthright. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. What was bargained for was what was known as the right of the firstborn. Jacob and Esau were twins. However, according to the narrative, Esau came out first, and so therefore Esau would have been declared the firstborn. I want you to pay close attention to what was bargained for between Jacob and Esau. And so you have Esau being the firstborn. And as the firstborn, Esau had the right to be the chief. He had the right to be the ruler in terms of this family line. And so in terms of a royal family line, because there are insinuations that this was a royal family. And so in terms of a royal family line, Esau had the right to be sort of the prince royal, the prince apparent. So we are basically talking about royalty rights. And so in one instance, you have the crown prince, and that's what Esau technically would have been, or he was. And so the crown prince is the male who is the heir apparent to the crown. This is the heir apparent to the throne. This is the person who is prepared to step into the position as king when the father passes. He also would have been understood as the prince royal, because the prince royal is the oldest son of a sovereign. And so hopefully this gives you a better idea of what was really going on in terms of this bargain. So this was a bargain for position, a sort of jockeying for position. And with the position comes power. And as we've discussed before, a Sar is another name for prince. And so essentially what was bargained for was this ability to be the Sar. And so the Sar is the chief, the ruler, the official, the captain, the prince. Now remember, we're not talking about the blessing dynamic. We are simply talking about the birthright issue. And so this bargaining for the birthright. And so this bargaining for the birthright was bargaining for the right of succession, to step into position of rulership over this entire family. And one thing to consider, because of the nature of this birthright dynamic in this family, is that this birthright may have come with some rights that most people might not think about. For instance, these were descendants of Abram. And by being descendants of Abram, and then having the birthright to be the chief, it's possible that this birthright dynamic was associated with being the chief ruler over not only this particular house, but also over the house of Abraham. And so what Jacob was seeking to acquire and what Esau, according to the narrative, was relinquishing was this power to be governor, to be the lord, the taskmaster, the captain, the ruler, the prince. And this is so you can see the various transliterations for this word Sar. And so essentially both Jacob and Esau were born Sars. So both were Sar. However, with respect to rising up to assume the position of authority, when the chief leaves, you have one being sort of the chief Sar, but both were Sars. Okay, now focus in on this root. You have this root, which is Sarar. And this root is very interesting given this context, because what it means to be the Sarar is to act as the prince, to rule, but to act as prince. And so a person as a Sarar can be a ruler, can actually be a prince, but specifically may be identified as someone who is acting as prince. And based upon Esau's reaction to the dynamic with the blessing, the stealing of the blessing after the bargaining for the birthright, because of that behavior and his assertions, there appeared to be the belief on the part of Esau that Jacob was acting sort of like what you recall in the Stewart dynamic. He was acting as the pretender. So he was acting as prince. So according to Esau, Esau believed that Esau was the rightful heir to the throne. And as you see here, additional indications related to this Sarar dynamic. And so one of the understandings of Sarar is that the Sarar is an appointed prince versus someone who succeeded legitimately by birthright. And you see here this idea of making oneself a prince. And again, instead of succeeding the typical way, in this understanding with Sarar, it can be someone who made himself or herself a Sar. And so we have Jacob rising to become this prince, to become this ruler. And Jacob is transliterated in a number of ways. In one way, Jacob is understood as James, hence King James also being known as Iacobus. James also is known as Iakov, and that would be from the Romans or the Romanian understanding of the name. The name for the Romanians for Jacob, for James, is Iakov. And so when you see that, it might be difficult to understand how you get from Jacob to Iakov. But if you recall our discussions about the betacism dynamic, the B and the V are interchangeable in some languages, and this is one of those languages. And so for the Romans, also known as Romanians, in this particular instance, you have Jacob being Iakov. And this is so that you can see it more clearly. You can see here this transliteration with Iakov being the equivalent of James, or in the English, Jacob. And so with this narrative, you have Jacob or Iakov being the chief, the Sar, and then the descendants being the Sars. And so all of the sons were Sars. And then the daughter is also a Sar. And so the descendants of Jacob, that first line of descent, those would all be considered Sars. Now, similar to the Jacob and Esau dynamic in the Stewart family, you also had the Sars, and you had these battles for succession. And the battles for succession were tied to religion in these instances. And so in some situations, you did not have what would be considered the heir apparent actually becoming the heir to the throne. You had someone else becoming heir to the throne based upon some dynamics that did not have to do with the normal succession rules. This all leads us to a revisiting of the Kingdom of Judah on the west coast of Africa. We've examined this before, but we're going to re-examine it, and it has to do with the representation of the Kingdom of Judah, the King of Judah on the west coast of Africa. And so the person on the screen is King Ammar. What you notice when you look at this very closely is that the depiction of Ammar is synonymous with what would be a depiction of a Roman king. When you look at the Roman helmet, you also see the Roman sandals. You see the pants that are Romani looking pants. Red is the primary color. You do not see purple. You also see the plume that is coming out of the helmet. This then brings into question yet again, who is supposed to be this king of Judah? And what is this kingdom really all about? In this instance, not only do you have this anomalous dynamic going on with respect to the appearance, you also have the name Amar. Now, Amar is not restricted to any particular group of people. However, in this instance, as we've already examined, Amar or Amor, this is a name that goes with the Amorites or the Amori. And so again, it brings into question, what exactly is the identity of this kingdom on the west coast of Africa? And this is so that you can get a closer look at this depiction of the king of Judah on the west coast of Africa. So in addition to this Roman crown, you also have this prevalence of gold and red. And this is so that you can get a closer look at the bottom of the picture. One thing to keep in mind is that with respect to Hafan, there is some indication that Amar might have been the father of Hafan. And here you can see more closely the name of this king and his title. As we wrap this up, we're just going to touch on the proliferation of the Roman identity throughout the world. And one proliferation was noted in North Africa with Armarica. Then you had another identity in Europe as Ormorica. And then, of course, you have America. You also have another variation of this Amar, this Roman identity, in the word or the name Amaru. Now, many people in the Americas are identifying with this name Amaru. However, it's just another variation of America. It's another variation of Roman. And you can see here that Amaru is situated in Romania. So this is the land of the Romans. Hopefully you can see the many implications that have grown out of this narrative related to these battles for succession with Jacob and Esau. And so you had a birthright battle that was going on. You had this bartering for the birthright, and then you had the theft of the blessing. And what resulted from this was a significant amount of bitterness on the part of the firstborn. It's unclear how all of this bitterness played itself out during the lifetimes of these two individuals. However, you see manifestations of this bitterness going on even today. You also see that there have been many instances of these identity appropriations going on with respect to this narrative. And there's also a narrative of revenge with respect to this battle for succession. And even though it appears that the older brother lost out in the beginning, it appears that the older brother or the descendants of the older brother are doing what is known as the most. So they are doing the most. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.